Hi, my name is Mackenzie Squires. I recently wrote an essay on Steve Reich and his early electronic music called The Early Electronic Music of Steve Reich. I don't know what it's called. What is my essay called? Electronic Music of Steve Reich. Okay, Hi, my name is Mackenzie Squires. I recently wrote an essay on the electronic music of Steve Reich and I'm presenting it at NCUR 2021. 2021. What year is it? Okay. Hi, my name is Mackenzie Squires. I recently wrote an essay on the electronic music of Steve Reich, and I'm presenting my research at NCUR, the National Conference for Undergraduate Research 2021, in a couple months. I wanted to do a practice round and present some of my research out into the open. I hope that you enjoy my presentation and a little snippet into my essay and how I got to where I got. Please enjoy. Let me set up my screen. Awesome. Okay, the electronic music of Steve Reich. So I'm going to talk briefly about my methodology. If I keep glancing down a little bit, that is because I have my notes to the side of me, and I just want to make sure that I cover everything. If you can see me, if you can't see me in the video, then it's all good. We'll get into it. Okay, the electronic music of Steve Reich. Methodology. So how did I get to this idea? I brainstormed a whole bunch of ideas. I am a percussionist. I had just been to So Percussion Summer Institute, which was virtual for 2020 when I wrote this essay and when I did the research. So I had So Percussion on the brain, and Reich and So Percussion work very close together. We had performed clapping music at SoC and then watched several videos of So Percussion playing drumming with Nexus. So then I was like, okay, that's cool. I really enjoy clapping music and drumming, which is kind of minimalist and it's almost post minimalism. But that's how I was like, okay, I really like minimalism. Let's talk about righteous minimalism. So my first thesis was this research will examine the minimalist works of Steve Reich through discovery and explorations of phasing in drumming, clapping music, and music for pieces of wood. So there's going to be three pieces that I focused on. Then my second thesis evolved into this research will examine the minimalist works of Steve Reich with emphasis on It's Gonna Rain and Come Out through discovery and explorations of phasing in his early electronic compositions. And how did I get from drumming, clapping music, pieces of wood to It's Gonna Rain and Come Out electronic music? In researching drumming, clapping music, and music for pieces of wood in those first couple of days, I came across Reich's electronic compositions. Um, and I was like, well, this isn't what I would perform. This isn't up my alley, but this would be really fun because I'm not familiar with it. And it'd be really fun to dive into and explore how Reich got from a nobody to someone that percussionists all know by name for drumming, clapping music, and pieces of wood, and so many other pieces. So I dove into electronic compositions. How did I find my information? Hunter Library here at Western Carolina University has a very great minimalism and music section in the library. There are hundreds of books just dedicated to, probably not hundreds, but there are a lot of books dedicated to John Cage, who was a precursor to minimalism, and then books on the big four for minimalism: Terry Riley, Lamont Young, Steve Reich, and I always do this. I get to the fourth one and I forget who they are. Um, John Adams. Let me just make sure. I'm pretty sure it is John Adams. Philip Glass. It's Philip Glass. Okay, here we go. Two. Okay. Hi. Hi, my name is Mackenzie Squires. I am a student at Western Carolina University, but you don't really care because this isn't for you. This is for me. This is on my YouTube page so that people can see my research and see me talking about it. Anyway. Okay. Hi, my name is Mackenzie Squires. In case you don't know who I am, I, this past semester, researched Steve Reich and his electronic compositions. I wrote an essay, which I will be presenting at NCUR, the National Conference for Undergraduate Research 2021, which will be virtual this year, in a couple of months. And I wanted to give a test run and talk about my piece so that anyone who didn't want to read the essay or look at the research is welcome to listen to me babble on about it. So here we go. Let me pull up my PowerPoint. Okay, technical difficulties. Here we go. Okay. Electronic music of Steve Reich was my research. We're going to start with the methodology, how I got to where I got. I started brainstorming some ideas. I am a percussionist by trade, and I had just come from SOC, So Percussion Summer Institute, which was virtual last year, 2020, when I did the research. And so percussion works really close with Steve Reich. They play a lot of his music. We played clapping music at SOC and watched the So members play drumming. And then, so that was where I started. I was like, this is my base. This is where I want to start. So then I started just Googling basic things about Steve Reich, and I realized that he's one of the big four minimalists. And when I say the big four minimalists, that means just the four that started and that are most widely known for minimalism in music. And those four are Lamont Young, Terry Riley, Steve Reich, Philip Glass. And they were all born and grew up and did the same ideas around the same time. And then I just kept brainstorming from there. So my first thesis turned out to be this research will examine the minimalist works of Steve Reich through discovery and explorations of phasing in drumming, clapping music, and music for pieces of wood. So I was going to research those three pieces and do an essay analyzing the music and talking about where they came from and where Reich came from when he was creating these pieces, what inspired them. But then as I was reading about those three pieces, I saw It's Gonna Rain and Come Out and a few of Steve Reich's other electronic compositions. And I realized that I was less familiar with that area because they're not as widely performed, and that I wanted to learn more about them. And what better way to learn more about them than to research them and write an essay? So my second thesis was this research will examine the minimalist works of Steve Reich, with emphasis on It's Gonna Rain and Come Out through the discovery and explorations of phasing in his early electronic compositions. And I loved this, so I just kept going with it. How did I find information and how did I get to this thesis? I used the Hunter Library, which is the library here at Western Carolina University, and they have a section on music, and then they have like a subsection on minimalist music and what came before, what comes after, and those kinds of things. 20th century music is really big. Then I would read everything on the internet, and I came up with a thesis and springboard off of that. So next, I'm going to talk about minimalism. What is minimalism? I think I have to stop myself because this slide is just my best slide. I'm so happy with this slide because it just embodies minimalism. Okay, that's all. What is minimalism? Minimalism is a term taken from the visual arts. You can notice that the M is lowercase in this because when referring to music, the M is lowercase, whereas referring to the visual arts, the M is uppercase, capitalized. And that's just a weird tidbit fact to throw out there. I thought it was really cool. I like writing and text, and that's very interesting. Um, Lamont Young, one of the big four, born in 1935, states that minimalism is that which is created with a minimum of means. There are four main composers associated with the minimalist movement: Lamont Young and Terry Riley, both born in 1935, Steve Reich, born in 1936, and Philip Glass, being the youngest, born in 1937. They were born within 18 months of each other, which is really interesting. These four composers believe that a composer should reject the musical ideas of the previous music movements and emphasize the simplicity of the melodic, harmonic, and rhythmic content in order to reduce the historical or expressive narrative. So they took all the ideas of the previous musical movements and said, we don't need these, and chucked them. And we're like, we want the simplicity of all factors of the music to tell the story and express a story. So, my final iteration of my thesis was this research will examine the minimalist works of Steve Reich, with emphasis on It's Gonna Rain and Come Out through the discovery and explorations of phasing and early avant garde electronic compositions from the beginning, with a discussion of Different Trains, which came out in 1988 and was Steve Reich's dive back into electronic compositions. Now, not all of that was my thesis, some of that was me rambling, but that's the idea. Who is Steve Reich? Reich was born in New York, and he grew up listening to composers such as Beethoven and Schubert. He began studying drum set with Roland Koloff, who was the timpanist for the New York Philharmonic, and then started teaching drum set lessons. Koloff introduced Reich to jazz, bebop, Bach, and Stravinsky, so he widened his horizons and introduced him to new music. After studying with Koloff for a little while, Reich formed his own jazz ensemble and laid the foundation for an obsession with rhythm and percussion. Performing is where he really got into it. He also studied with Milhaud, Berio, and Overton. Reich is said to believe that Overton had the biggest impact on him overall, but Berio had one of the most pivotal statements to say to Reich. It's said that Berio said that if Reich wanted to write tonal music, then he should just go ahead and write tonal music. Berio basically saw that Reich's music and compositions had static harmonies, repetitions, as well as other techniques that were utilized in tonal music or common music. Overton had the biggest overall impact to Reich, is what he believed, is because Overton was able to look at compositions on a micro level and inspired a level of clarity that would become characteristic of Reich's style of music. Reich is known to have used characters such as repetition, cycles, improvisation, repeated chord progressions, phrasing, keeping a beat, maintaining a reserve, or discipline while determining what could be seen and heard in those three areas of music. He's also known for strict structures, and which are used in the Cantus Firmus canon, and he's known for augmentation. These are all characteristics of Bach, Schubert, Stravinsky, bebop, jazz, popular music, Baroque, Puritan, and the medieval period, all of which influenced Reich and can be seen very clearly in what he does and what he produces. Reich's first attempt at setting poems to music, which is kind of where he got into electronic music, failed. when he tried to set some poems by William Carlos Williams to music. He failed. He failed at that. He was not able to do that. But he was inspired by Williams' ideas that artists should go out into the world, record what is around them, and then reproduce something. And this had a huge impact on his electronic music because this is what he did. So we're going to start with a timeline. At the same time that Reich was commissioned by Robert Nelson to write a tape piece to be played with an experimental film. So around the same time that he was reading Williams' poems and trying to set this. And so this later became Plastic Haircut, which premiered in 1963. Plastic Haircut was comprised of collage-like soundtracks from the LP Great Moments in Sports. So we're going to take a listen real fast. Just kidding. Oh no, now you can see all of my search history. Okay, now we are going to listen to it. I'll edit that clip out.
It's time to quit.
So in this, you can see that there are repetitions. Just in that short clip, you can hear the repetitions of what people are saying and the like cutting and splicing, and then you can kind of hear like a melodic factor, but that doesn't come quite into play yet. So then next, he Reich attempted to write another collage piece similar to Plastic Haircut, but he accidentally discovered phasing, which phasing is the idea that you can take two tapes, identical tapes of music, set them to run, to play aloud at the same time, and then they slightly separate from one another, kind of creating this like, so if you're going like steady, it'd be like da, 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 but they're together, right? So it'd be the same, but then you kind of, they start to slip from each other. So you go da, 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 and then they pull back and come to be as one sound. So it's just a little like, they separate and you'll hear it. So this is a clip from Odin Watermelons, which came out in 1965 at the same time as It's Gonna Rain, or around the same time. Odin Watermelons was a commissioned piece that premiered, I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but it premiered at a demonstration, a protest against the treatment of Black people of color in 65. So we're going to watch a few seconds of that. Just a few seconds. And it kind of gives you that like watermelon, like it feels kind of out of sync. This one you can really hear the melodic content of Watermelon. You can hear it as you listen to the voices. So then we went to It's Gonna Rain, which premiered in 1965. Reich refers to this as his Opus 1, as like the beginning of the beginning. So here in this picture, you can see It's Gonna Rain. This is the melodic content that he really focused on, that he heard spoken material used in It's Gonna Rain, spelling according to Reich's transcription, punctuation added for an ease of reference, words used for musical development presented in bold. So, in part one, this is all the words that he came from the recording that he took, but then he used It's Gonna Rain for the melodic content, for like the focus, the melodic content. And part two, same thing. But sure enough, Der cry, but Noah couldn't open a door. It had been sealed by the hand of God. Those are the words that he's gonna use all of parts of them, but those are gonna be the words that are emphasized. So while attempting to write yet another collage piece, Reich accidentally discovered phasing. It's Gonna Rain premiered, which he used in his Opus 1, The Beginning of the Beginning. It's Gonna Rain premiered in 1965 in San Francisco. This 7-minute piece is based on a single melodious 3-word fragment. It's Gonna Rain. Reich was inspired by Williams' ideas and went into the nearby subway station and recorded Brother Walter's, an African American preacher, sermon about God and the art. So this is where the words come from, and the melodic material was recorded from him. It's Gonna Rain. In It's Gonna Rain, Reich takes the melodic profile of Brother Walter's sermon and the rising major third heard at the beginning of the statement and creates a loop with it. This right here. Reich used 2 Wallenstein tape machines and an Amex to compose It's Gonna Rain. The inexpensive machines, I'm sure there's a better way to say that, but the inexpensive machines were said to play back the tapes of Brother Walter's words at the same time, and they did not. The slight difference in playback speed caused the 2 identical tapes to sound slightly apart from one another, creating phasing. The phasing of the 2 tapes became part 1 of It's Gonna Rain, this top section. Part 2 starts with 2 voices that slowly phase, similar to part 1. These 2 voices are then doubled, and the 4 voices slowly phase against one another. This process is repeated so that there are 8 voices phasing with one another. So we're going to take a second and listen to it.
He began to warn the people. He said, after a while, it's going to rain after a while, for 40 days and for 40 nights. And the people didn't believe him. And they began to laugh at him. And they began to mock him. And they began to say, it ain't going to rain. It's gonna rain, 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 it's gonna 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 it's gonna
You get the idea. You can listen to the whole piece on YouTube. I think the piece is fascinating. And that's just a snippet of part 1. In part 2, Reich talks about how part 2 is the purest process piece that he ever did. And what he means by purest process piece is that it is the most authentic, simple by accident process piece that he made. Process meaning that in recording the sounds, he created the music itself. So what makes part 2 unique and interesting is that within the tape piece, a listener can hear an outside sound mixed into the music. While recording Brother Walter's sermon, a pigeon flapped its wing in the background. Reich was delighted when he discovered this sound later when he was mixing them in the recording studio. He believed that the extra dimension was a significant contribution to the piece, that the repetition of wings beating added an experimental element to the music. And if you give it a listen, you can hear this in the background. It gives it like a definitive beat and like a, not quite a snare sound, but similar to that. Next, in 1966, was Steve Reich's piece, Come Out. Come Out is a piece that Reich decided to take 5 words spoken by Daniel Ham, and create a 13-minute piece. The 5 words spoken by Ham were come out to show them. Ham was recorded in an interview with the Harlem Six, a group of African Americans who had been accused of murdering a white shop owner. In the interview, Ham says that the only way he was allowed to be taken to the hospital to be treated for his beating by the police was to open his bruises and let them bleed out, to actually show how serious his injuries were. Reich was provided with over 10 hours of recordings and interviews from the Harlem Six in 1964 by Truman Nelson. Nelson is a civil rights activist and author, and he gathered the interviews while doing research for a book that he was working on. The program that Reich's piece was to be premiered on consisted of compositions by various composers about the Harlem Six and in protest of their treatment by police. The piece was initially ignored, but when it was released later on CDs, its importance was realized. It was overshadowed, to be frank, by the other pieces on the program. And while researching this and finding pictures for this PowerPoint, I found this quote, and it says, with its hallucinatory looping, Reich's Come Out anticipates the sort of numbness and exhaustion that now results from a 24/7 news cycle that blends outrages and atrocity into a dangerous, undifferentiated mass. And I think that's very important to the statement that his piece was ignored. And it was ignored not for that exact reason, but for similar reasons that um, I think I don't know this for sure, but I think it was last on the program or near the end of the program. So just after being presented with all of this information and being presented with all of this information, humans get overwhelmed, our systems get overwhelmed, and we cannot see how serious and how important every piece is. So let's talk about the piece itself, what it's made out of. So come out, the basic unit, come out to show them. This is the melodic content. So this piece opens up with an interval of a minor third, similar to the minor third that we just saw in It's Gonna Rain. This could be, both of these thirds can be seen as, excuse me, homages to It's Gonna Rain, but then both of them suggest a key of C minor, and this allows for a clarity in the vowel sounds. C minor is a very clear, easy to follow sound. The 5 words used in Come Out, similar to the words in It's Gonna Rain, are stated unaltered at the beginning of the piece. As it develops, the comma sound from Come Out creates a melody, while the sh sounds from Show Them create a percussive, almost maraca sound in the background when the pieces phase. This emphasizes the phonic or the sound of the words through a systematic rigor and intuitive control that sets it apart from Reich's other pieces. The initial clarity of the text highlights the emotion behind the words and their cultural significance. The social protest of the words and their context is heightened through the sheer repetition of what is being said. Slowly, Reich decides to move from the text to a textual and away from the purity of the sound. The complexity of the sounds as listeners move through the piece can be interpreted as being charged with frustration at the danger of pent-up repression. Keith Potter, the author of Musical Minimalists, say that 4 times fast, states that the statements on repression are enhanced by the grim transmutation of a human outcry against injustice into the relentless machinations of a force beyond human control. In my words, this outcry against the injustice that African Americans such as Ham face can become an important statement for change when they are incorporated into music and allowed to be presented out of the human control and be digested by all audiences. So we're going to take a second and listen to this one, just a few seconds.
I had to open the bruise up and let some of the bruised blood come out to show them. I had to like open the bruise up and let some of the bruised blood come out to show them. I had to like open the bruise up and let some of the bruised blood come out to show them. Come out to show them, 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 come out to show them.
Okay, just a few seconds. But you can hear the come out being the melodic part of it, and then the show them in the background going shh, shh, which is very interesting. The next piece that Reich created would be melodica, as you can see, the basic unit. And then here it is. We'll take a second and watch it. Melodica was his next composition. The piece was not popular because it phased and duplicated itself more times than it should have. More times than it should have, more times than the audience was ready for. And it created kind of a canon, which is not what you can hear in the other pieces that came before it. Due to its lack of success, Reich quickly moved on to write two other tape pieces that premiered in 1967, By Art, and My Name Is, or My Name Is Ensemble Portrait. So we're going to listen to Melodica, and then we'll take a second and listen to My Name Is. So Melodica was premiered, like I said, in 1966. Reich had a dream where he heard this sound, where he heard the basic unit and heard it on an instrument, that the only instrument that he could find that closely recreated that sound was through a melodica. So it took him like 2 days to write this piece and record it and send it out into the world, whereas Come Out took several months. So then he moved on to By Art, and My Name Is. By Art was a promotion for an art exhibit where he had the artists who were presenting their art and the people working at the exhibition say buy art or come buy our art or you should buy our art or similar phrases like that. And then he took them and spliced them up, set two identical parts to play against each other and create phasing. My Name Is a similar idea, and he did it later. He did My Name Is at a concert where he recorded audience members saying My Name Is and then their name. And then once the concert started, he took the recordings, put them together, copied it, made it a duplicate, and then set them against each other to phase. He then realized just how much work that was going to be and move on to My Name Is Ensemble Portrait, where he recorded the members of his ensemble and did the exact same thing, saying My Name Is, and then setting two identical tapes against each other. Just that way he could create it ahead of time and he didn't have to do it in the moment. So this is one from 2020 over quarantine that someone put together. So we're going to take a second and listen to them. And that's just interesting. I thought that person's name was interesting, so I decided I would use it. So then, 1968, we move on to slow motion sound and pendulum music. So Reich is getting kind of tired of tape pieces and phasing and setting them against each other, so he's exploring other electronic avenues, and he comes to slow motion sound. He has this idea that he can take music, a chord, for example, and slow it down as slow as possible to be recorded back, but only so slow until it changes pitch, and then he'll back it up a little so it stays the same. He wants it to be played as slow as possible to where it stays the same and doesn't lose its characteristic. technology was not what it is nowadays in 1968. So he quickly abandoned that and moved on to pendulum music. Pendulum music is the idea that you take amps and set them on the ground and then hang microphones by their cords from the ceiling. And performers, there are 4 performers, each one with a microphone over an amp. Performers pull back the microphones and release them all at the same time. And then the performers have a seat in the audience and watch the piece play itself out. And so as the pendulum moves, it makes a sound over the amp and then comes back, and eventually it'll come to rest and it'll be one direct sound. And then we'll hopefully watch a clip of it in the next slide. Yes, pendulum music. So here are the directions. 2, 3, or 4 more microphones suspended from the ceiling by their cables. Basically what I just said. You can read this if you want to. Here's a performance. We're going to watch a few seconds of it. So you can get the gist, and then as it keeps going, the performers will walk away and leave their microphones. And eventually all the microphones will come to rest over the amps and have that feedback sound. It's another interesting process piece because once you start it, it is what it is and it changes every time, which is nice to think about because I was studying John Cage at the same time, that to see the similarities between Cage and Reich, who was probably influenced by Cage. So next, we have the phase shifting pulse gate. And this is, again, with computers and technology, he developed a program to put a gate on music, put a gate, and a gate filters sounds, basically. And someone's going to call me out and be like, that's wrong. And I'm sorry. I took 2 electronic music classes, by no means an expert. I'm just explaining how I understand it. So a gate filters sound. And so the software was to take music, any music that was already on a computer, digitized, and set it against each other using this gate. He quickly abandoned that idea. He did not pursue it again because technology is not what it is today. So then that leads us to his stopping using electronics. He started studying African music and other cultural music and non-electronic acoustic music and clapping music, drumming, music for pieces of wood, Ngoi marimbas, all of those came out because he was tired of electronic music and didn't think that he could create anymore. So then that was in the 60s. He began experimenting with facing new technology. So 20 years later, after his failure with the phase shifting pulse gate, I didn't say this. Audience hated what he created with the phase shifting pulse gate. They did not like the music. Critics didn't like the music. So he was like, whatever, it's not successful. I can go do this other thing, this acoustic thing. And so that's what he did. But then 20 years later in 1988, he decided to come back to, no, my gosh, sorry, to come back to electronics and explore how he could put acoustic music with electronic music and explore the combination of those. So different trains, he worked with Kronos Quartet to create a piece, which is 3 movements. I'm pretty sure it's Europe, America, and then post-war for both. So he created this piece, and it's Kronos Quartet, which is strings and electronics. And he went back to his tape roots and put together this piece where he recorded Americans talking about World War II, Europeans talking about World War II, and the idea that Steve Reich himself grew up during the World War II time, and that if he had been in Europe because of his Jewish heritage, he would have been on a very different train than the one he was riding here in America. And he spent a lot of time on trains here in America because his parents were divorced. One lived in New York and one lived in California. And that's how he met Terry Riley and the other two Middle-East composers, because he's traveled between the two places, even in his adulthood. But in his childhood, he traveled across America by train with his nanny. And so he recorded her voice and her story of them riding in the trains across America every month or so, every year or so, whenever he did it. And then he also recorded train conductor voices and several other voices, and then survivors of the Holocaust in Europe. He recorded their voices and created that with Chronos to create a very beautiful piece. And I highly recommend you go and look it up and listen to it. I do not have a slide here because another student in the class did their research on different trains and they were presenting on that. And I did not want to present on something that had already been presented on. But that's the gist of different trains. It calls back to the repetition of voices and the repetition of the melodic content, creating that percussion sound versus the melodic content, and then the melodic content of the voices creates all of the melodic content that the strings will play throughout all three movements. It is interesting, I will say, during my research that I found the train sounds. I wish I knew where they came from, because it's interesting to think if Reich traveled to Europe post-war and recorded trains there, or if he just used train sounds from here in America, or if he did both and then used them for the different train sounds for the different movements. And I don't know the answers to that, but it'd be really interesting to look into. Okay, finally, we're going to talk about four organs and politics for a second, because during this research, I came across a lot of interesting things about Steve Reich, and we're going to start with four organs. Four organs is not an electronic piece, but my cute little minimalist drawing of a spaceship. So Four Organs was written during the Cold War and was written during an era of space travel, and space travel being really big and really new. And so in the margins of the original score for Four Organs, Steve Reich drew spaceships, and I like to think that it's similar to this one. It might not be, but he drew them, and that shows people who are studying Reich and his politics and his race pieces, which are what the electronic compositions are referred to as. His early electronics, like Come Out and It's Gonna Rain, are his race pieces. It just shows that Reich was very aware of politics if he himself didn't talk about them, because he has political, social things in his margins of the original scores. So the challenges and surprises that I found while researching this, right in the middle of researching this, and I almost stopped researching it and picked a different topic and started over from scratch. This article was released or published, this little snippet was published in a book. And it says, well, you can read it for yourself. It is a racist comment by Reich. And a little while later, he tweeted, or someone tweeted for him, because he's 84 years old, and I highly doubt he knows how to use Twitter. But someone said that he said, I do not recall this conversation, which would have taken place about 50 years ago. What I do remember is being in New York around the time when Black people were struggling to be heard, respected, treated justly, just as they are now. I supported that struggle back in 1967 when I wrote Come Out against police brutality, and I support current events for racial justice today. Now, this does not in any way make up for what he said, and this almost seems like a blanket statement, like it's not real, but maybe it is. I don't know, because Steve Reich is very adamant about not talking about politics. He'll talk about it if he has to in interviews and things, but he would rather stick to the music and the um, theory, the melodic content, those kinds of things, not the story behind the music. Um, People are researching this now, and I'm not the only one to be researching this or looking for an answer as to how he feels or what he's thinking. Um, but this was something that came up. This was published right when I was doing the research. And since I was doing research on what has been called his race pieces, because It's Gonna Rain and Come Out are both pieces spoken by African American males, um, and taken maybe with permission, maybe without permission. A lot of sources do not say whether he had permission to use their voices or their experiences. Um, and we can talk about today how I cannot speak for anyone, but that it's wrong to steal someone's voice and use their voice for monetary value or for a way to get forward in the music industry specifically without their permission, especially the voice of someone who is not similar to you, not part of your community, your culture. Um, I talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis and the space race in the Cold War. That was for organs, and how he's aware of the politics and he is aware of what's happening in the world. Odin Watermelons is another example of that was a minstrel show speaking out against the treatment of people of color. That minstrelsy is something that painted blacks, African Americans, those descended from slavery, as incompetent. And you can do your own research into minstrelsy, but that this was minstrelsy in protest of minstrelsy and the treatment of blacks. So he's in these movements while he's younger, which shows that he either believes in the movement and what they're trying to change or is doing it for money. I don't know, but that he's aware of these things and what's happening. In my research, I did find that after different trains, he started working in electronic pieces and acoustic, like the combination of electronic and acoustic pieces. And through this, rediscovered his Jewish heritage. And there's this idea presented in a lot of research about how the African American voice appeals to those of Jewish heritage because they have seen similar oppression throughout the years. And that could be an explanation as to why Reich was compelled to use the African American voice in his earlier electronic pieces. That's an interesting concept. I don't know if it's true or if it's just hearsay, but I thought it was interesting that you can make the connection between their struggle, and that would be a reason that he would feel like it's okay to use the African American voice in his pieces. Um, Reich is very adamant that he stay out of politics and that musicians are not meant to make political statements themselves. Reich believes that a composer should stay out of social and political affairs, but despite this, his minimalist compositions reflect political ideas. Sumanth Gopinath, and I am so sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name, the associate professor of music theory at the University of Minnesota, whose doctoral thesis was on race and his relationship with Reich. He wrote a paper, Rethinking Reich, I think is the name of the paper. He believes that Reich was someone who thought about politics but is not a political thinker himself. He believes that Reich doesn't have a rich, complex system of politics, but has instinctual political beliefs. He states that Reich tends to shut down or avoid political conversations in interviews, which I found in my own research. Reich himself has stated that art is a reflection of political concerns, but Reich has also said that minimalists should stay out of it. They should present an idea. All musicians or artists should present an idea and then let the listener, the viewer, whatever, create their own ideas from it. Reich believes that he may not state his political beliefs, but they are represented and reflected in his music. Some musicologists and historians have presented the idea that Reich found solidarity, and I talked about in the words of the African Americans, because of his Jewish heritage. Um, I have decided that Reich says he isn't political while making political statements. That Reich is fully aware of what is happening in the world and reacts to it the only way that he knows how, by writing music. That he doesn't write the music to influence other people, but to figure out how he feels about the world. He wants to present music and allow people to get what they want out of it. Then, when people try to say that he is making a statement or trying to influence listeners to believe something, he gets frustrated and chooses not to respond, believing silence is better than fighting what everyone else believes about his music. And in Reich choosing not to make a statement, he makes a statement about his beliefs. Um, I do believe that my idea of Reich will change, that he is of an older generation. He and other older people can be very liberal and radical when they're younger and make bold statements because they want their fame. They want to set themselves apart. They want to be active. And then as you get older, you get more conservative and less worried about your fame, which we might or might not be seeing in what he's saying. Um, yes, and that was the challenges and surprises. I'm still developing my idea and doing research and talking to people about Reich and their experience with him and their experience with his electronic music. And I cannot wait to present this at Anchor, and I hope that you enjoyed. If you have any questions, I am so happy to talk about this or anything you find interesting on my YouTube or that you think I might find interesting. I'm so happy to talk about anything. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.